The billionaire moved his queen with the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything that mattered. Across the board, the young black woman in the red dress looked helpless, confused, out of her depth. Exactly like she wanted him to think. Because Harrison Blackwell didn't know he was playing against Jasmine Carter, the only person to ever make Magnus Carlsen forfeit, the youngest Grandmaster in women's history, and the woman who was about to turn his casual racism into the most watched humiliation in internet history. In exactly 17 moves, this 70-year-old pharmaceutical tycoon would lose $50 million, his dignity, and his belief that success meant superiority. But first, he had to stop laughing at her amateur opening move, the same move that had destroyed 13 world champions and was about to destroy him. The Ivory Queen slid across the marble chessboard with a whisper that silenced the entire restaurant. Jasmine Carter, 24 years old and dressed in a scarlet dress that caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, placed the piece with the same precision she'd once used to demolish 13 international grandmasters in a single tournament. Across from her, Harrison Blackwell, silver-haired, 73, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, stared at the board with the dawning comprehension of a man who'd just realized he'd been checkmated in 17 moves by someone he'd assumed couldn't tell a pawn from a bishop. That's impossible, Harrison breathed, his weathered hands trembling slightly as they hovered over his conquered king. The Michelin-starred restaurant around them had gone quiet, the usual symphony of clinking silverware and murmured conversation replaced by the electric tension of witnessing something extraordinary. You said you'd never played competitively. You said you just knew the basic moves. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her lips that would have been familiar to anyone who'd watched the 2019 World Chess Championships in Moscow, where she'd become the youngest woman ever to win gold, while simultaneously breaking the record for fastest victory in tournament history. But Harrison Blackwell, despite his fortune built on claiming to recognize talent and potential, had seen only what he'd wanted to see. A young black woman who'd accidentally wandered into his exclusive restaurant, someone he could impress with his wealth and what he assumed was his superior intellect. The entire scene had started 45 minutes earlier when Harrison, dining alone at his usual table overlooking Central Park, had noticed Jasmine sitting by herself, studying something on her phone with an intensity that intrigued him. He'd sent over a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon naturally, with his compliments, fully expecting the usual response of flattered gratitude he received from women a third his age. Instead, she'd sent it back with a note written on a napkin. I don't drink, but thank you. The rejection had piqued his interest in a way that acceptance never could. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or judged by someone who thought they knew your worth at a glance, this story will remind you why the quietest people in the room often carry the loudest victories. Take a moment to subscribe to Acts of Depth, where we celebrate those moments when assumptions crumble and truth emerges in the most unexpected ways. Harrison had approached her table with the confidence of a man who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals over breakfast, his Tom Ford suit catching the light as he moved through the restaurant like he owned it, which technically he did, being the majority shareholder. I couldn't help but notice you're alone, he'd said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Harrison Blackwell. You might have heard of me. Blackwell Industries, Blackwell Foundation, the Blackwell Tower downtown. Jasmine had looked up from her phone, where she'd been analyzing her next opponent's games for the upcoming Gibraltar Chess Festival, and saw exactly what Harrison wanted her to see. Wealth, power, and the kind of self-importance that assumed everyone else existed to be impressed by it. She could have told him then that she knew exactly who he was, the pharmaceutical executive who'd made headlines for price-gouging insulin, the philanthropist who named everything after himself, the man who'd once said in a Forbes interview that success was about recognizing superior genetics and natural hierarchies. Instead, she'd simply said, Jasmine, just Jasmine. The way he'd smiled at that, like she was a delightful puzzle to be solved, made her decision for her. She'd closed her phone, hiding the chess.com interface where she was ranked #1 in the world under her username, QuietStorm, and said, Would you like to sit? Harrison had practically glowed with satisfaction as he'd taken the seat, immediately launching into what he clearly considered charming conversation about his art collection, his yacht, his recent acquisition of a Basquiat that he admitted he didn't quite understand but knew was very valuable, very important. Jasmine had nodded along, filing away every tell, every unconscious revelation of character, the same way she cataloged an opponent's patterns on the board. "Do you play any games?" Harrison had asked eventually, probably thinking of tennis or perhaps polo, the kind of activities he associated with the leisure class he belonged to. "I know a little chess," Jasmine had replied, her tone carefully crafted to sound uncertain, almost apologetic. "My grandfather taught me the moves when I was young." The transformation in Harrison's face had been instant and predatory. The expression of a wolf who'd just heard a lamb mention it had never seen a wolf before. "Chess? Now that's a game of intellect, of strategy. I've been playing since Harvard, captain of the chess team, actually. Won the Ivy League championship 3 years running." He'd paused, as if considering whether to make the offer, then continued with magnanimous generosity. "Would you like to play a game? I could teach you some advanced strategies. I have a board in my private dining room upstairs." Jasmine had tilted her head, pretending to consider, though she'd already seen 20 moves ahead. "Here might be better," she'd said, gesturing to the public dining room. "If you don't mind people watching." Harrison had laughed, the sound rich with confidence. "My dear, I never mind an audience when I'm about to demonstrate excellence." He'd snapped his fingers, and within minutes, a staff member had appeared with a marble chess set that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, setting it up on their table with practiced efficiency. As they'd arranged the pieces, Harrison had kept up a steady stream of condescending instruction. "Now, the knight moves in an L shape, that's this horse piece here. The bishop moves diagonally. Think of it like it's blessing squares in a straight line. And the queen, well, she's the most powerful piece on the board. Rather fitting, don't you think, that in chess at least, the woman has all the power?" He chuckled at his own progressive humor, missing the way Jasmine's fingers had twitched with the muscle memory of 10,000 games. "What stakes shall we play for?" Harrison had asked, clearly expecting her to suggest something modest. Perhaps dinner or another bottle of champagne she wouldn't drink. Jasmine had looked at the board, then at Harrison's smug face, and made a decision that would change both their lives. "If you win, I'll listen to you explain your entire art collection over dinner. Every piece, every acquisition story, every dollar spent." Harrison's eyes had lit up with delight. "And if you win? Though I should warn you, that's rather unlikely." "If I win," Jasmine had said slowly, her voice carrying a weight that made nearby diners turn to listen. "You donate $50 million to inner-city chess programs. Real programs with real teachers and real equipment. Not just a press release and a tax write-off." The number had made Harrison blink, but his ego wouldn't let him back down, especially not with half the restaurant now watching. $50 million? My dear, that's quite a sum for someone who just knows the basic moves. "Then you have nothing to worry about," Jasmine had replied, extending her hand across the board. "Do we have a deal?" Harrison had shaken her hand with the firm grip of a man who'd never lost anything that mattered, who'd lived his entire life believing that his success was proof of his superiority. "Deal. Though I almost feel guilty taking advantage of your inexperience." The first 7 moves had gone exactly as Jasmine had predicted. Harrison played the Italian game, a classic opening that revealed both his traditional training and his assumption that she wouldn't know how to counter it. He moved his pieces with theatrical flourish, explaining each decision as if he were teaching a child, his voice carrying across the restaurant with the authority of someone used to being listened to. "You see, by controlling the center, I establish dominance early. Chess is like business. You must claim your territory before your opponent even realizes the game has begun." Jasmine had responded with what appeared to be random moves, carefully crafted to look like beginner's luck while actually setting up a Sicilian defense variation that wouldn't become apparent until it was too late. She held her pieces uncertainly, sometimes reaching for one before changing her mind, playing the role of the overwhelmed novice to perfection. Inside, her mind was running through possibilities at the speed that had once made her coach at Howard University call her a supercomputer in a sundress. The memories of how she'd become the player now sitting across from Harrison Blackwell flickered through her consciousness as she moved her knight into position. She'd learned chess not from any grandfather, that had been a convenient fiction, but from Ms. Rodriguez at the Benjamin Banneker Academy in Southeast D.C., a public school where the ceiling leaked and textbooks were held together with duct tape. Ms. Rodriguez had started the chess club with her own money, staying after school for free because she believed that children who learned to think 10 moves ahead on a board could learn to think 10 moves ahead in life. Jasmine had been 8 years old, skinny and quiet, the kind of child teachers worried about because she never raised her hand despite always knowing the answer. Chess had given her a voice that didn't require speaking. On the board, she could be bold, aggressive, brilliant. She could take spaces that had been denied to her everywhere else. By age 10, she was beating everyone at the academy. By 12, she was competing nationally, taking buses to tournaments because her single mother couldn't afford flights, sleeping in motels where the locks barely worked and the walls were so thin you could hear every argument, every sob, every small tragedy of poverty. But she'd kept winning. Won so much that by 14, the chess world couldn't ignore her anymore, even though she didn't look like the other players at elite tournaments. White, wealthy, trained by private coaches since they could walk. She'd show up in her hand-sewn dresses that her mother had stayed up all night making, sit down at boards across from opponents whose parents owned companies and countries, and she'd destroy them with a quiet precision that earned her the nickname, the Silent Assassin. Harrison moved his bishop, still talking, still explaining, unaware that Jasmine had already identified 3 critical weaknesses in his play style. You know, chess is really about reading people, he was saying, his confidence growing with each move. I can tell, for instance, that you're intimidated by aggressive play. You keep retreating, playing defensively. That's why women typically struggle with chess. Too passive, too emotional. A woman at the next table audibly gasped at the comment, but Harrison didn't notice, too focused on what he believed was his impending victory. Jasmine moved her pawn forward 1 square, a move that looked defensive but actually opened up a devastating attacking line that wouldn't become visible for another 6 moves. Is that so? She asked mildly. Women are too emotional for chess? Oh, I don't mean it as an insult, Harrison said quickly, the way men always did after saying something insulting. It's just biology, evolution. Men are hunters, women are gatherers. Different strengths. I'm sure you're excellent at... What is it you do, exactly? Jasmine had to suppress a smile. She hadn't told him what she did, and he hadn't asked beyond that initial assumption that she was someone who needed impressing. In his mind, she was probably a secretary, a teacher, maybe a nurse, something appropriately feminine and subordinate. He couldn't imagine that she'd just returned from giving a lecture at MIT on advanced probability theory and competitive gaming, or that she had a master's degree in applied mathematics from Johns Hopkins, or that she'd turned down offers from 3 Fortune 500 companies to focus on her chess career and her nonprofit that taught the game to underprivileged kids. I teach, she said simply, which wasn't a lie. She did teach. Ran camps for young players, especially girls and children of color who'd been told chess wasn't for them. Young people, mostly. I try to show them that anyone can learn to play. Harrison chuckled, moving his queen into what he thought was a threatening position. How admirable. Though I hope you tell them that while anyone can learn to move the pieces, not everyone can truly master the game. It requires a certain type of mind, a capacity for complex thinking that, frankly, most people simply don't possess. The arrogance of it, the casual dismissal of human potential based on nothing more than his own inflated sense of superiority, made Jasmine's next move even sweeter. She advanced her knight, a move that looked like a blunder, leaving her queen apparently vulnerable. Harrison's eyes lit up with greed, and he immediately captured the queen with his bishop, not realizing he'd just walked into a trap that chess enthusiasts would later call the Carnegie Sacrifice, named after the restaurant where it happened. Oh no, Jasmine said softly, putting just enough disappointment in her voice to fuel Harrison's ego. I didn't see that coming. Don't feel bad, Harrison consoled her, his tone dripping with condescension. The queen's sacrifice is one of the most complex concepts in chess. Even experienced players struggle to see it coming. You're actually doing quite well for someone at your level. That's when Jasmine made the move that would later be uploaded to YouTube under the title, The Moment a Grandmaster Realized He'd Been Played. She moved her rook to the 7th rank, and suddenly, the entire geometry of the board shifted. Harrison's king was exposed. His pieces were pinned, and what had looked like a commanding position revealed itself to be a house of cards. She didn't say anything, didn't explain the way he had. She simply leaned back and waited for him to see it. The transformation of Harrison's face was a masterclass in human emotion. First confusion, his eyes darting across the board as he tried to understand how his winning position had evaporated. Then calculation, his fingers twitching as he mentally tried different responses, finding each one worse than the last. Then suspicion, his gaze snapping up to Jasmine's calm face. Searching for signs of the hustler, he was beginning to suspect she might be. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, the entire restaurant seeming to hold its breath as Harrison Blackwell's fingers hovered over his king, trembling with the realization that every possible move led to checkmate. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows caught the gold bracelet on Jasmine's wrist, a gift from the World Chess Federation that he wouldn't recognize, engraved with her name and the words 2019 World Champion, in letters too small to read from across the table. "You're not just someone who knows the basic moves," Harrison said slowly, his voice stripped of its earlier pomposity. Around them, other diners had abandoned all pretense of not watching, their own meals forgotten as they witnessed what was clearly becoming more than just a casual game between strangers. "Who are you?" Jasmine moved her bishop into position, cutting off another escape route with the same precise elegance she'd used to defeat Anatoly Volkov in the semifinals of the Moscow tournament, where she'd made the Russian Grandmaster cry actual tears when he realized he'd been outplayed by someone 40 years his junior. "I told you, I'm Jasmine. I teach chess to young people." "No." Harrison's voice had taken on an edge of something between anger and fascination. "No one plays like this without years of serious training. This endgame, the way you sacrificed your queen to expose my king. I've seen this before. I've studied this exact sequence." His face went pale as the memory clicked into place. "The Carlsen-Nakamura match from 2018. But you've modified it, improved it somehow." The fact that he could recognize the bones of the strategy beneath her innovation showed he wasn't quite the amateur he'd presented himself as either, though he was still leagues below her level. Jasmine decided to give him a crumb of truth, just enough to fuel his growing panic. "Actually, Carlsen learned that variation from me. We played a practice match in 2017, unofficial. He's incorporated elements of my style into his game since then." Harrison's hand knocked over his water glass, sending ice and liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. A waiter rushed over, but Harrison waved him away impatiently, his eyes never leaving Jasmine's face. "You know Magnus Carlsen. You've played Magnus Carlsen." "I've beaten Magnus Carlsen," Jasmine corrected gently, moving her knight into the final position. "Checkmate in 3 moves, Mr. Blackwell. Unless you'd like to resign now and save us both the time." The murmur that ran through the restaurant was electric. Someone whispered, "Did she just say she beat Carlsen?" Another voice responded, "Google her. Someone Google her." The distinctive sound of phone cameras clicking began to fill the air as the other patrons realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Harrison stared at the board, his empire of pieces reduced to useless decoration around his trapped king. His face had gone from pale to flushed, the kind of red that his personal physician had warned him about during his last checkup. "This was a hustle. You lied to me." "I never lied," Jasmine said calmly. "I said I knew a little chess, which is true. No one really knows more than a little chess. The game is infinite. I said my grandfather taught me the moves when I was young, which is technically true. Mr. Rodriguez, who ran the chess club, was a grandfather figure to all of us. You're the one who made assumptions. You manipulated me." Harrison's voice was rising now, drawing even more attention. "You knew exactly who I was when I approached you. This whole thing was a setup to embarrass me, to take my money." Jasmine's expression remained serene, but her voice carried a steel that made several nearby diners lean in to hear better. "Mr. Blackwell, you approached me. You sent champagne I didn't want. You offered to teach me a game you assumed I didn't know how to play. You made a bet you were certain you'd win because you looked at me and saw someone inferior, someone you could impress with your money and your Harvard education and your billion-dollar pharmaceutical company that charges diabetic children $700 a month for insulin that costs $3 to produce." The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Harrison's face went from red to purple. How dare you? I dare, Jasmine interrupted, her voice never rising above conversational level. Because while you were at Harvard playing chess for trophies, I was in Southeast DC teaching 8-year-olds with diabetes how to ration their insulin so it would last the month. While you were acquiring your Basquiat that you don't understand, I was watching kids in my program lose fingers and toes to complications from diabetes they couldn't afford to treat properly. So yes, Mr. Blackwell, I knew exactly who you were. The question is, do you know who you are? A young woman at a nearby table started clapping slowly. Then others joined in, the sound building until Harrison looked around wildly, realizing that the entire restaurant had turned against him. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it to see a text from his assistant. Sir, you're trending on Twitter. The video of the chess game has 50K views already. The bet, Harrison said desperately, grasping for any way to salvage his dignity. The $50 million, that was based on false pretenses. No court would enforce it. Jasmine pulled out her own phone and showed him the screen. It was a live stream from her Instagram account, where 847,000 followers had been watching the entire game. The comments were scrolling too fast to read, but the general sentiment was clear from the emojis. Fire, crowns, and chess pieces mixed with celebrations. No court needs to enforce it, Mr. Blackwell. 800,000 people just watched you shake on the bet. Your reputation, what's left of it, depends on whether you're a man of your word or not. Harrison's hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white with pressure. For a moment, Jasmine thought he might flip the board, resort to the kind of primitive violence that men like him always carried just beneath their civilized surface. But then something else crossed his face, a recognition, perhaps, of how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered not just on the board but in life itself. Who are you really? He asked one more time, his voice now quiet, almost broken. Jasmine stood, smoothing down her red dress with the same grace she'd shown throughout the game. My full name is Jasmine Alicia Carter. I'm the current world chess champion in 3 categories: classical, rapid, and blitz. I hold the record for youngest woman to achieve Grandmaster status and the fastest checkmate in tournament history. I have a master's in applied mathematics and I run the Carter Foundation, which teaches chess to underprivileged youth in 12 cities. She paused, letting each achievement land like a chess piece being placed on the board. I'm also the person you just lost $50 million to. Money that will go directly to providing chess programs and diabetes medication to children who need both. The revelation rippled through the restaurant like a stone dropped in still water. Phones appeared at every table as diners frantically searched for Jasmine Carter chess champion. Their screens quickly filling with images of her accepting gold medals, shaking hands with world leaders, and gracing the covers of magazines from Time to Chess Monthly. The woman in the red dress they'd watched humble Harrison Blackwell wasn't just good at chess. She was arguably the best female player in the world, and possibly one of the top 5 players regardless of gender. Harrison's phone began ringing incessantly. His publicist, his lawyer, his ex-wife who somehow always knew when he'd embarrassed himself publicly. He ignored them all, his eyes fixed on Jasmine with a mixture of humiliation and something else, something that looked almost like respect. The Moscow tournament, he said quietly. You're the one who made Volkov cry. They called it the most brutal psychological destruction in chess history. Volkov cried because he realized he'd been beaten by someone he'd dismissed before the match even started, Jasmine replied, gathering her phone and purse with unhurried movements. He'd told reporters that women lacked the killer instinct for high-level chess, that they were too emotional to maintain focus during long matches. I beat him in 93 minutes. He had plenty of time to be emotional about it afterward. A young black girl, maybe 15 years old, had appeared at their table, her server's uniform indicating she worked at the restaurant, but her starstruck expression showing she knew exactly who Jasmine was. Ms. Carter? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I follow your Instagram and I just wanted to say, my little sister started playing chess because of you. She's 10 and she just won her first tournament last week. Jasmine's entire demeanor shifted, the cool strategist replaced by genuine warmth. What's her name? Destiny. Destiny Williams. Tell Destiny that her hero is proud of her, Jasmine said, pulling out a business card. And give her this. This my direct email. If she wants, I'll review some of her games and give her feedback. The girl's eyes filled with tears as she clutched the card like it was made of gold. Harrison watched this interaction with the dawning realization that he'd fundamentally misunderstood not just who Jasmine was, but what she represented. She wasn't just a chess champion who'd hustled him for money. She was a symbol, an inspiration to kids who'd never seen someone who looked like them dominate a game that had been gatekept by people who looked like him for centuries. The 50 million, Harrison said suddenly, his voice cutting through the moment. I'll transfer it today. All of it. Jasmine turned back to him, studying his face with the same intensity she'd studied the board. Why the sudden cooperation? 5 minutes ago you were threatening legal action. Harrison gestured to the restaurant around them, where every eye was still watching, every phone still recording. Because you're right. I know exactly who I am. I'm a 73-year-old billionaire who made his fortune selling overpriced medicine to desperate people. I've bought politicians, crushed competitors, and justified it all by telling myself I was simply better than everyone else, that I deserved my success because of my superior intellect and breeding. He laughed bitterly. And then a 24-year-old woman destroyed me at the game I've used to measure that supposed superiority my entire life, in front of half of Manhattan's elite. He stood slowly, his movements showing his age for the first time since he'd strutted over to her table with his peacock confidence. But more than that, you did it with such elegance, such complete mastery, that I can't even claim you got lucky. You played me from the moment I sent that champagne. Didn't you? Every word, every gesture, even that red dress. It was all calculated to make me underestimate you. The dress was just because I like red, Jasmine said with a slight smile. But yes, the rest was intentional. Though I should mention, I would have been perfectly happy to have a pleasant lunch and leave. You're the one who insisted on the chess game. You're the one who needed to prove your superiority. Harrison pulled out his phone and made a call to his CFO. His voice steady as he authorized the transfer of $50 million to the Carter Foundation. The entire restaurant listened as he confirmed the routing numbers, verified his identity, and made the largest charitable donation of his life. Though for him, it represented less than 2% of his net worth. When he hung up, he looked at Jasmine with something approaching genuine curiosity. Can I ask you something? Why did you really do this? It can't just be about the money for charity. There are easier ways to raise funds when you're as famous as you apparently are. Jasmine considered the question, glancing around the restaurant at the faces watching them. Some still recording, others simply absorbing the drama of the moment. When I was 12, I played in my first major tournament. I was the only black girl there, the only player whose parents couldn't afford the hotel, so we slept in our car. I made it to the finals, and my opponent was a boy whose father owned a chain of hospitals. Before the match, his father told him, loud enough for me to hear, not to worry about losing to someone like me because those people were only good at physical games, not intellectual ones. She paused, the memory still sharp after all these years. I destroyed that boy in 37 moves. His father tried to claim I cheated somehow, demanded they review the game, check me for hidden devices. When they found nothing, he still wouldn't accept it. He said there must be something wrong with the rules if someone like me could beat his son. That's when I realized that for people like him, people like you, Mr. Blackwell, excellence from someone like me isn't just unexpected. It's an existential threat to your entire worldview. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Around them, the restaurant had begun to return to normal, though people still snuck glances at their table. And so you've spent your career proving them wrong? No, Jasmine said firmly. I've spent my career proving myself right. There's a difference. I don't play chess to defeat racist old men who underestimate me. Though I'll admit it's a pleasant bonus. I play because I love the game, because I'm brilliant at it, and because every time a little black girl sees me win, she knows that brilliance isn't limited by skin color or bank accounts. She turned to leave, then stopped, looking back at Harrison one last time. You asked earlier if women are too emotional for chess. The truth is, Mr. Blackwell, that emotion is what makes us dangerous on the board. You played to win. I played with the weight of every girl who's been told she's not smart enough, strategic enough, good enough. That's not a weakness. It's a superpower. It means I'm not just playing for myself. I'm playing for millions. The video of the chess match went viral within hours, but it was Jasmine's final speech that truly captured the world's attention. Hashtag the Carnegie Checkmate became the top trending hashtag globally, with everyone from celebrity commentators to professional chess players weighing in on what many were calling the most elegant public humiliation in modern history. Magnus Carlsen himself posted a simple tweet. "I told you all she was the most dangerous player alive. Harrison Blackwell just learned what I learned in 2017. Never underestimate the quiet ones." But the real impact came in the days that followed. Harrison Blackwell, to everyone's surprise, didn't retreat into damage control or legal threats. Instead, he did something unprecedented for a man of his stature and ego. He leaned into the lesson. 3 days after the chess match, he appeared on CNN for an exclusive interview, where he admitted not just to losing the game, but to losing his way. "Ms. Carter didn't just beat me at chess," he told Anderson Cooper. His usual corporate armor replaced with something approaching vulnerability. "She held up a mirror to who I'd become. A man so insulated by wealth and privilege that I'd forgotten other people were actually people, not just props in my success story. When she sat across from me, I saw a young black woman alone in an expensive restaurant and immediately assumed she was there to be impressed by me. The fact that she might be more accomplished, more intelligent, more strategic than me never crossed my mind. That's not just arrogance. It's a moral failure." The interview sparked a national conversation about unconscious bias, privilege, and the assumptions people make based on appearance. But more concretely, it led to Harrison doing something that shocked his board of directors and delighted patient advocacy groups. He announced that Blackwell Industries would be restructuring its insulin pricing to match production costs plus a reasonable profit margin, effectively cutting prices by 90%. "It will cost us approximately $2 billion in annual revenue," Harrison admitted in the press release. "But as Ms. Carter reminded me, that money came from letting children suffer and die from a manageable condition. No amount of profit is worth that." Jasmine watched the announcement from her apartment in Harlem, surrounded by the trophies and medals that Harrison hadn't noticed during their game. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Interview requests, sponsorship offers, challenges from other players who wanted to test themselves against the woman who'd become chess's newest legend. But she ignored most of them, focused instead on the messages from young players around the world who'd been inspired by the match. A 13-year-old girl from Detroit wrote, "I showed the video to the boys at my school who said girls can't play chess. They don't say that anymore." A father from Mumbai messaged, "My daughter made me sign her up for chess lessons after watching you. She says she wants to be just like you." But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Harrison Blackwell himself, delivered not through email or text but via handwritten letter on personalized stationery. "Ms. Carter, I've spent the last week thinking about our game and realized something. You didn't just beat me at chess. You gave me an opportunity for redemption I didn't deserve. You could have simply destroyed me and walked away. Instead, you turned our game into a teaching moment for the world. And more importantly, for me. I'm 73 years old. At my age, most men are set in their ways, convinced their worldview is correct because they've succeeded within it. You forced me to confront the fact that my success came not from superiority but from a system designed to favor people like me while handicapping people like you. The fact that you succeeded anyway doesn't validate that system. It indicts it. How many potential grandmasters never touched a chessboard because they couldn't afford it? How many brilliant minds were dismissed because they came in packages society didn't value? I've enclosed a second check for $100 million, made out to your foundation. This isn't about our bet, that debt is already paid. This is about investing in the future you're building, where every child has access to the tools that let their brilliance shine. I'm also restructuring the Blackwell Foundation to focus exclusively on funding education and healthcare in underserved communities. I've hired a new board of directors, all women, mostly of color, all under 40. They'll make sure the money goes where it's needed, not where it makes me look good. You asked me if I knew who I was. I do now. I'm a man who spent 70 years believing his own mythology and one afternoon learning the truth. That's painful, but it's also a gift. Most men die without ever confronting their real selves. You gave me the chance to become someone better before it's too late. The chess world talks about perfect games. Matches where every move is optimal, where strategy and execution align flawlessly. Our game wasn't perfect in that technical sense. I made too many errors born of arrogance, and you had to adjust your strategy to teach rather than simply win. But in a larger sense, it was perfect. It accomplished exactly what it needed to accomplish, not just for us but for everyone watching. Thank you for the lesson. It was worth far more than $50 million. With respect and gratitude, Harrison Blackwell. P.S. I've been studying the endgame you executed. It's brilliant. A variation I've never seen before. Would you consider publishing an analysis of it? I think the chess world would benefit from understanding how you saw those 17 moves ahead. Then again, perhaps some magic should remain mysterious. Jasmine folded the letter carefully, adding it to a box of correspondence she kept from young players, coaches, and parents whose lives had been touched by chess. This letter felt different, though. It was proof that even the most entrenched mindsets could change when confronted with undeniable truth delivered with strategic precision. 6 months later, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first Carter Blackwell Chess Academy in Southeast D.C., Jasmine stood next to Harrison as they watched 40 kids from the neighborhood stream into a state-of-the-art facility equipped with digital boards, a library of chess books, and coaches trained in both strategy and mentorship. Harrison had insisted his name come second on the building, a small gesture that spoke to a larger transformation. You know, Harrison said quietly as they watched a young black girl carefully set up her pieces for her first lesson. I've won hundreds of chess games in my life, but losing to you might be the most important thing that ever happened to me. Jasmine smiled, thinking of all the games yet to be played, all the minds yet to be unlocked, all the assumptions yet to be shattered. The game's not over, Mr. Blackwell. We're just getting started. As the sun set over the academy, casting long shadows across the chessboards where future grandmasters would learn to see 17 moves ahead, Jasmine thought about the real victory. It wasn't the $50 million, though that would help thousands of kids. It wasn't the viral fame, though that had opened doors for important conversations. It wasn't even Harrison's transformation, remarkable as it was. The real victory was in the eyes of that young girl setting up her chessboard, moving her pieces with the careful concentration of someone discovering their power for the first time. She looked up, caught Jasmine watching her, and smiled. The smile of someone who suddenly understood that the board was just the beginning, that the real game was always bigger than 64 squares, and that sometimes the best move wasn't the one that won the game but the one that changed it entirely. In chess, as in life, the most devastating victories weren't always about destroying your opponent. Sometimes they were about showing them a better way to play. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very skilled, you could transform an enemy into an ally with nothing more than quiet moves and perfect timing. That was the game Jasmine Carter played, and she'd only just begun to show the world what winning really looked like.